Yeah, so the work we're presenting here represents a collaboration between the Endure project and the Open University Sound Dune Coastal Change project, and that's myself and Chris. So there's more information about the Sand Dune Coastal Change project online at sanddunecoastalchange.org. The Sand Dune Coastal Change team worked with Endure at a Coastal Partners workshop a few years ago, and with Coastal Partners identified 4 sand dune sites in Norfolk where they could benefit from public engagement work to help with dune management. And Norfolk Living Dunes was developed as a follow-on project to work with the Endure team at those sites. And at the time of the funding, we had the pandemic, so we couldn't actually do any of the public engagement work that we'd planned. So the work we're presenting is really a consequence of that, as well as something we're all quite proud of. So, how do you move that? So
Living with Dunes was the film that came out of this and was produced over 2 days. And one day was baking hot, so we were sheltering from the sun, and the next day it poured with rain all day. So the film has got a kind of climatic contrast, and extreme weather events have influenced the film itself, let's say.
Yeah. And we launched the film to coincide with the Dynamic Dunescapes, who initiated World Sand Dune Day, and the first World Sand Dune Day was this year. And we wanted to contribute to that, and we couldn't really hold a public event. So again, although it's not a public event, we talked to lots of people, and therefore we started to engage with people in the process of making the film, which, as Chris said, was done over 2 days. We're working in North Norfolk, obviously, and it's an area of coastal vulnerability, and in a way, we sort of see it as a laboratory where you've got all these kinds of experiments dealing with how to cope with climate change and sea level rise. And they've been going on for centuries, probably. So you've got sea defences at Bacton Sands, you've got groins, you've got gabions and mechanical barriers at Wells, seawalls at Great Yarmouth, different approaches like hold the line or manage retreat. And dunes are being revalued within that context as a soft sea defence. So the sand dunes themselves have become part of the experiment and how we manage them. So yeah,
North Norfolk, whatever happens to North Norfolk is a sort of a foretaste of what's going to happen to the rest of the country. And as we saw this morning, there are lots of different ways that you can try and hold back the sea. So this is what we mean by a laboratory, because it's trying out different systems. And of course, we know that all the people in this room, and I imagine a lot of people online, are already experts. So we're also exploring and learning more than we're sharing.
So the film represents a network of human and non-human elements which come together around the dunes, and we've listed a few here, and we'll know that you may notice many of them in the film as you watch it, and in fact we want you to do that. But just a little bit before we show you the film about how we made it, we wanted the sand dunes to be the central actor and element in the story. Because they've become an important actor in relation to climate change and coastal defence. So we thought, well, they should be central. And we started off in the film with a wow factor, and that emerged from the people we talked to, including the Endure team, Alex and Mel, about what they valued about the dunes and why they cared about them. And a lot of that wasn't really about their role as a sea defence so much as this wow factor of they're full of life, they're home to so many different species, and the people who live near and walk in them, they're valued for so many different reasons. And that, of course, can be tapped into when you're trying to protect them. So we took a practical and a theoretical template to structure the film. So from a practical view, we did a walk through the dunes talking to different partners and residents from a theoretical structure, we used Bruno Latour's Parliament of Things, which has two central questions. It's how many are we? And that means not just humans, but non-humans. And how can we live together well? So we kind of used that theory to structure the film. And these questions bring humans and non-humans together in Holme-Next-The-Sea, where the film was made, creating a Dune public, what we see as a space for deliberating different views and evidence and ideas. And what I hope you'll see in the film is that we hoped that people formed the questions together, or formed the issue of the dunes together, rather than endure coming in and saying, well, this is what the issue is, or the Norfolk Wildlife Trust, people being able to express what they thought was the issue at the beginning, and then that being brought together in the film made them feel perhaps trusting and able to listen to what all the different people in the film said.
I think one of the important aspects of this is the idea of listening, and it came out of the previous projects, which were also about listening, and they're listening to elements of these networks, so not non-human actors or non-human elements in the networks that make up the dunes, and trying to understand how they operate. And also, a lot of the time we are representing non-human elements. So, for example, the RSPB represents the interests of birds. So representation and how we act as representatives is a key concept which underlies the sort of theoretical part of the framework for this this film.
Yeah, and so we also, the film includes examples of dilemmas, and that rather comes under the umbrella of can we live together well, and if we can't, who or what can't. So there were dilemmas presented, for example, in Dune Health Management about how the marron grass might be maintained at the correct level, and how that could be slightly in dispute with how the coastal paths are planned, for example, or how the pug moth and certain visitors might live together well. But we didn't try to solve the problems, we just wanted to open them up as dilemmas for people to think about in the film. So, without further ado, we're going to watch the film, but we wanted to make it slightly interactive, and we wanted to get your approach. We know you're all quite experts in the field, you probably know more about dunes than we do, but also the way we made this film is also as a tool for engagement, for public engagement. So in another world that wasn't having a pandemic, we might show this in a village hall at home and then use it as a point of discussion. So we very much want you to watch it with those eyes and think about how you see that role of, if you like, creative engagement. But also, we'd like you to notice, what actors we were able to represent in the 2 days we were there, but also who or what you think is missing from the film and why or how that matters. So if you could hold those questions in your mind as you watch the film, and we'll have a discussion about that at the end.
Hi there, I'm Alex Lata. I'm Project Manager for the Endure project, ensuring dune resilience against climate change, working for Norfolk County Council. And we're here today, of course, to celebrate World Sand Dune Day. And so you will join us on a brief walk through the dunes onto the beach, where we'll present to you the different stages of the dunes and some of its biodiversity.
Why is this piece of coastline so wonderful? If I walk from my house down Stave Lane onto the seawall and through the firs and into Holme-Next-The-Sea, the light here is wonderful. The air is brilliant. The air is clean, the panoramas, the vision, the vistas.
So sand dunes are fascinating, and the reason they are so good for wildlife is that sort of dynamic process. So sort of starting at the sort of beach side, you get these embryotic dunes where it is just like tiny bits of vegetation capturing bits of sand that slowly build up into what we call the yellow dunes, and that's the sort of classic marron, which is one of the sort of specialist pioneer species of grass. will sort of bind the dunes, and then other things like sea fescue and sea holly to sort of get a hold. As sand dunes get older, sort of up to 50 years after that time, we go to sort of what we call the grey dunes, which are far more established, and that's where you get plants like the pyramidal orchid and the bird's foot trefoil, you know, really good sort of bright nectar sources for bees, that sort of thing. And then further back we get what we call the dune slacks, which is where there's the sort of freshwater influence, so water coming up from underground in the case of Holme, sort of from the aquifer, and that's where you get things like the natterjack toads breeding, and that's a real iconic species at Holme, and they require that sort of fairly bare ground, so well grazed, and they require the dunes for burrowing and breeding. I mean, the dunes we've got here at Holme are some of the oldest on the Norfolk coast, and it depends obviously, because you get things like when you get the tidal surges, and that'll knock things about, but if everything goes sort of to plan, if you like, then we're talking about a 50-year sort of transition from those sort of yellow sort of early dunes through to the grey dunes, which are more established and get the sort of bigger vegetation on.
And it's fascinating to me how these little tufts of sand start, and how does the marron grass come? Where does it, how does it know?
Yeah, it works on rhizomes, so it comes underneath, so it sort of spreads itself really, and it just needs that stable sort of moment in time really to be able to then get the process underway. And once it's started, it looks after itself. I think the sand dunes are becoming increasingly important. You know, they're the first and line of defence really. We're far more aware nowadays about climate change and rising sea levels, and we've seen sort of those more extreme weather patterns and occurrences. So the sand dunes become really, really important. They're really important for wildlife. You know, the dynamic of the dunes, sort of the different habitats within the dunes, you know, create a habitat for lots and lots of different species. So that's really important, and they're really important for people. You know, they're an intrinsic part of this part of the coast, and people come to see them and enjoy them.
Yeah.
The things with Holme is it's such a mosaic of habitat. So we go from the open beach through the sort of foreshore to the dunes, and then through to sort of grazing marsh at the back of the site as well. So it's a real mosaic, and that's one of the reasons Holme is so special.
Tell me what you love about the sand dunes.
Well, I think I love it because every time you come it can be different. Like today is windy and there's not much sort of happening, but then on other days it can just be alive with movement and birds and the warmth of the sun. It's just a magical place for me to come to.
Isn't there?
Yep, when you go for a walk or you just sit here, you just look on the ground and can see so many different plants, and then you can look up into the air and see groups of birds flying around. It's just amazing how much you can see in 1 hour sitting here. But yeah, but you know, it is amazing when you've got a child there. They might be playing, but then suddenly they'll see something and they'll call their friends over to look at what creature might be crawling along or what they found.
Yeah.
And that will, yes.
Yeah.
So that does, you know, and that's when people become interested in what is living and growing on the dunes.
My name is Andrew Jemison. I was born about a mile over there. I farm just over there. The sand dunes protect that farm, and indeed probably protect the house too. So I know this coast and I love this coast, and I would say there are 4 basic themes that I want to express about it. The first is climate. I live just across the way there. Climate is changing fast. The need to protect this coast from rising sea levels and certainly from changing weather patterns is vital, and the protection and sustainability of our dunes is a huge part of that. The second is nature. You've come here because this is an incredibly important natural site. It's a stopping off point in migration for every single type of bird heading north to Iceland or south to the Med, and and it has always been so, and we need to make sure that that still stays there. The third is people. We can see around us a lot of people enjoying the beach, and that is a wonderful thing, and I'm really pleased that they can come here. But I think part of the project, the wider project that Endure is based upon, is to think about how we can promote tourism in a sustainable way. Perhaps nudge people, wherever possible, towards a better thinking about how we use it. And the final point is place. This is a beautiful place, but people live in it.
For me, the walk, because I generally walk the coastal path, it's the 360 horizon, which is so different from each direction, and it's so lush, the biodiversity, and then you've got the sea, which each day looks totally different, and the beach looks totally different, and you could be anywhere in the world.
If I walk from my house down Stave Lane onto the seawall and through the firs and into Holme-Next-The-Sea, I pass through a string of environments, all of which are vital and precious. The dunes help to protect that area. We have to help protect the dunes, and that does mean we have to recognise, I don't want to say restrictions, but we have to help people understand your point. It's an area of outstanding natural beauty, it's a triple SI, it's a special area of conservation. We have to help people understand why those things are important and how they enjoy and respect this environment and share it with us.
People are naturally going to come here. I mean, if you look back in the parish minutes for the parish council, access to the beach was a problem here 100 years ago. In 1920, they were complaining about rubbish and car parking here where we're standing.
That's really interesting.
And we're on the same thing now 100 years later.
We haven't solved it yet.
No.
We haven't.
We want people to come and enjoy the coast and visit it, but we want them to do it responsibly, and I think that's really the message we're trying to get out there is, come and enjoy it, but do so in a way that doesn't impact too much on the site.
Yeah. And how do you communicate with people? Do you have like a mixture of signage and warden engagement? Or?
Yeah, I mean, certainly we've got signage on site, but we know that people become sort of sign blind almost. If you have too many of them, they sort of start to ignore them. So I think face-to-face engagement is definitely the best way to go. But that obviously requires a lot of resources, to employ staff or to train volunteers. So we have to balance that.
Yeah, that's fair.
So I met a couple of ladies walking this morning with their dog, and I was saying, how do people know, what to protect and where they can go and where they can't go? And they pointed to this rope, that area is roped off.
Yep.
And I said, well, I'm new to the area and I don't really understand that that's roped off.
And that's not your fault for not knowing, is it? And we're not helping you to know because we haven't signposted it. There's nothing there telling you that we've got little ringed plover who are ground nesting birds who are very rare and for whom the possibility of human beings, their nests are brilliantly camouflaged, their eggs are camouflaged. If you can walk along this beach and you would not realise that you were going to tread on a nest, destroy the eggs or scare the bird off, which means the eggs will get cold, the chicks won't hatch.
So the cordons are there really to protect the ground nesting birds. The whole of the Norfolk coast is sort of internationally important for its sort of shorebird nesting. So we have ring plover, oystercatcher and little tern. Those are the three sort of main species we've got. And the biggest threat to those is disturbance. People and particularly people with dogs out of control. So the cordons are there to sort of inform people, to sort of stay away from those areas, to give those birds a chance. They're incredibly vulnerable.
The strand line, which is where embryo dunes start, and so it's like that double benefit, isn't it? And we talk about birds, and actually dunes benefit from the protection that we give birds. I would argue on the dunes perspective that we should rope, probably all the embryo dunes across the whole place to give them a chance.
Yes.
And,
Yeah.
People wouldn't, enjoy the beach as much.
And I think what we could do as well, at Holcombe, for example, they're trialling areas without dogs, where dogs aren't going to be, and it'll be easily signed. And again, wardens will tell us why this isn't the spot to let your dog run wild. And I think that will also help. But a gradual understanding that a dog under close control is a very important thing. in a place like this. But that needs telling and reinforcing, I think.
Well, yes, when we were first down here, we were walking on the beach and we came across a couple of seal pups right out on the mud flats, and actually didn't realise, like a lot of people new to the area, we didn't realise they look like rocks from a distance. They're quite difficult to spot, and you can come quite close to them before you realise if you're not looking for them. And then after that, we obviously read up on them, found out a bit more about their life cycle, realised that they're meant to be on the beach, and we have mainly two types of seals here on our beach. We have common seals, they pup in the middle of summer, and grey seals, which pup in the winter. The common seals have a particularly tough time because, of course, they're born in the middle of the very busy holiday season. And although the pups don't tend to be born on our local beach here, what tends to happen is mum will only feed the pup for up to a month. She doesn't teach them to forage, so then they're left on their own to work out how to live and how to forage for food. And typically what we'll then see is the young pups come up on the beaches here. They might come up to rest, they might come up to digest their food, sometimes they come up to thermoregulate. Of course, we do get some that come up that aren't very well, but the problem is disturbance, because it's really important they're left on their own and that people don't disturb them. If they're chased back into the water, it can actually seriously compromise their future, because of course they use up so much valuable energy. But what we get is an awful lot of people. We've had people pick them up and take them back to the caravan. We've had people try to wrap them up in towels. You know, we've had a whole bunch of things. Typically, most people think they need to be chased back into the water. They don't realise that they're actually on land, on the beach for a good reason, and they should just be left alone. And the reason the sand dunes are so important is when there's a busy beach, if everybody respected the sand dunes and didn't go in there, the seal pups would be able to rest in that area, fairly sort of, you know, unaffected by the people on the beach. Dogs are of course also a problem. You can't see through the sand dunes, you can't see more than a few feet because of the shape of them. People let their dogs off lead, not realising and actually not thinking about what might be in the sand dunes, and then they disturb the pups as well. Sometimes we do get dogs attack seals, although more frequently it's the disturbance of them that's the problem. You know, the more we can pass that message on, the better. A friend of mine who lives locally has set up an awareness campaign called the Norfolk Seal Project, and you can find all sorts of information and leaflets on her Facebook page.
There's more and more people coming down here using the facilities, maybe not totally aware that what they're walking all over is the thing that protects the village. But because of the constant use, we're right near the car park, everybody uses that as the access to the beach. So there's quite heavy erosion there, and it is a weak spot in the defences. And as we saw, the water, when it came in, it flooded right up to the River Hun. You couldn't get down the beach road from the bridge. And there's a similar weak spot further along the second bank, just inside the Norfolk Wildlife Trust Reserve. There's a little small car parking area there. Again, people access over the top of the beach bank to get onto the beach, and in those 2013 floods you could see the tide mark there, which came halfway across the footpath, and if this bank hadn't have blown out, then that one would have done, and you would have had the flooding all over to the salt marsh and the grazing marshes the other side. But the erosion to the bank is fairly constant now, because we've got a lot higher numbers of people using what's now been designated as the coastal footpath. The damage to the dunes between Holme and Old Hunstanton is sort of quite marked, because it is along the top of the dune, and it's been moved there from the River Hun that used to be the footpath. When they first put in the long distance path from Hunstanton to Cromer, the section from Old Hunstanton to here followed the course of the River Hun, but they decided to push it out onto the top of the dunes, so you get a lot more people walking along there now than you ever did. And you can see the effects as well if you go just up behind the car park, the access onto the top of the bank for the footpath. There's no boardwalk or anything there to protect it, and people coming off the salt marsh path going up onto the bank, which is the official route, you can see where they're already wearing quite a deep gully in the dunes that really should have something done about it for sort of long-term protection.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's a common occurrence. That the issue we have is in theory trampling on dunes is a good thing, because a dune mustn't have too much marram cover or too little. And the problem that we find with people and this extreme pressure is that by going over one area, it creates an area of bare sand, and when it's 100% bare sand, it's extremely volatile. When it's 100% marram, it's static and it's not growing anymore. So then the other parts of the dune aren't actually benefiting from people's trampling. That would actually then create that dynamism which would have kept those growing. So actually we're finding that on both levels it's in a negative state, where actually and this is kind of the issue. It comes down with people is the dynamic management of paths and then communicating with people. Actually, if you follow the path, it's great, but then that means that then we need to work with all the site managers, and it's a big effort from everyone involved to then say, actually, we're moving the path. And then there's that slight added complication that the coast path is set in stone on the line on the map, and you're not allowed to change it, and public rights of way, you're not allowed to block them off. And so actually it's that the science of the dunes being dynamic doesn't match the way we do things in our planning system and our management systems. So yeah, it's an endless issue.
But you are talking about two separate things here, because you're talking about the dynamic dune, the actual sea dune, which is what's being walked on from Old Hunstanton to Holme. But when you get to Holme, from Holme to Gore Point, what you're walking on is a secondary sea defence, a bank that's been man-made, and that is being eroded, and that's not at all the same thing.
And then you change management issues. So then it's a different responsibility. And
Exactly.
And then it's a stakeholder thing as well. It's like who's in charge of this, and it's the complication of every 50 metres you've got a different person that's responsible for it.
That's right.
There is a policy of having dynamic path management, having exceptional communications with the public if you're doing that, to be able to inform on why we're moving the path and how that can help. Actually sticking to the path can help the site manager manage the dunes for future resilience. Right, so now we're walking up the access from the Norfolk Wildlife Trust Visitor Centre towards the beach, and we'll come across the Norfolk Coast Path in an instant, which is the origin of all the Endure project, because of course in the environment team at Norfolk County Council we manage and maintain the England Coast Path for the Norfolk stretch, and therefore we're encouraging visitors in their big numbers to go through our sand dunes, and therefore we need to mitigate the impact of people on our wonderful sand dunes to ensure their resilience, and that's the birth idea of Endure, really, in Norfolk. And so over the years over the last 3 years we've worked with various sites, including Holme-Next-The-Sea, to help with visitor management, fencing off areas that are more sensitive, protecting birds and communications with the public, to inform them on how to behave responsibly when in dunes, to enjoy the dunes but by respecting and protecting wildlife, fauna and flora. So now we're reaching the coast path, where we'll turn left towards the Sea Henge discovery site. So Theo, can you tell us a bit about this stretch of the coast path and how it's evolved over the last few years?
So this area we're coming into here is an area of slightly more mature dune. The area that was in front of us on the beach was damaged fairly recently by the storms, so there's a lot of collapsed vegetation there, which has set us back a little bit. But these pine trees fallen to the right of us now. These were felled in the 2013 big floods we had, so and they sadly all perished due to the water damage. And over the last few years the other vegetation has grown up through and around them. This area that we're coming into here has now started to have some more emergent vegetation, brambles, sea buckthorn and some small trees, and also a huge variety of grasses now coming through onto the reserve, of which Holme Dunes is famed for in the country for its huge variety of plants.
Holme is one of the 3 sites that are our knowledge partners in the Endure project, the University of Ghent in Belgium, specialising in terrestrial ecology, sampled the marram grass at Holme, and in their samples they studied the entire ecosystem around the marram grass clump, including the roots, and there are microscopic nematodes, so microscopic worms living in the marram grass roots, and they're parasitic, so they eat the roots. And so actually by killing off the marram kind of has to grow and has to trap sand to continue living, so therefore there's a symbiosis between the worm and the marram grass. If there isn't that worm present in the roots, then the marram grass doesn't grow and doesn't trap sand, and and then it's a too healthy ecosystem where there aren't those parasites. Actually doesn't help marram thrive, which is quite interesting. And so then you potentially rely on other species of grass, but as marram is kind of the keystone species, and it's the one that we talk about a lot in dunes, it's an interesting science and tool to have, especially in the light these days. We're looking at encouraging new dune planting and new marram grass planting to create new dunes in front of hard infrastructure and actually give a chance to what we call soft implementation and soft infrastructure as the new coastal defence. Using satellite imagery afterwards to establish across the entire coastline of the programme area for Endure project, which is the 2 Seas area, all the way from Cornwall to Norfolk, how healthy our marram grass was, and therefore how healthy our dunes were, based on the ecosystem. And Holme was actually really, really good, even though it had just suffered from that storm. The founding principle of the dunes here is very, very strong and healthy, and so there should be, over the years, good recovery. And so if then the sand dune can grow, we can actually monitor the marram grass that we plant to see if that new dune that we're planting is healthy and if it's about to grow or not. In the Netherlands, I mean, they nourish their beaches so their dunes grow faster than sea level rise. That's the dream, to have that funding. But here it's a bit harder, so actually it makes it even more important, vitally important, to protect those embryo dunes, to be able to then create those yellow dunes that they grow, because they're the real sea defence, they're the real buffer. That's the sand that gets taken away by the sea, and that's the first line of defence.
Well, we have one full-time warden who lives on site and has been here for many years and knows the site really well, and he's supported with seasonal staff. So in the summer we have a beach warden who's sort of dedicated to sort of looking after the beach, engaging with visitors, telling them why the site is important and how they can behave to help us keep it that way. Absolutely. I mean, I think what we realise is we can't do this in isolation, and working in partnership is becoming incredibly important, and that's partnership with local residents, parish councils, different stakeholders, but also sort of trying to join up the coast, so different organisations. There's ourselves, the RSPB, National Trust, Holcomb. We need to sort of have a sort of joined up approach, if you like, and a similar message going out to people. And I think having that sort of relationship with the local stakeholders is becoming increasingly important. Yeah. We've started a scheme where we're having local volunteers, and they are generally from the village here, to go out with wardens onto the beach and sort of work with them to do that engagement work. I was talking earlier about the issues with dogs, and one of the things we'd like to do is to get local dog walkers to become sort of dog ambassadors for the site, and sort of go out with their dog and say, well, this is how my dog behaves, keep it on a lead, and can you do the same? So it's not sort of telling people what they've got to do, but suggesting what they should do.
Colin, as a chairman of a parish council, I think This leads me nicely onto my next point, which is knowing the land on the site is the job of the warden and the site managers, but the local people know the site perfectly, like the back of their hands. Do you think that currently there is enough involvement, or they're involved enough in the protection of the sand dunes, or how could they be more involved?
Can I give you an example of how
Yes.
we got involved last year?
Yes.
The staycation boom, and this isn't to criticise people, but last summer with the staycation boom, the number of tourists were astonishingly high. That's fine. Large numbers of people drove down Staithes Lane towards Thornham Harbour, and because they were new visitors, and because we had no way of explaining to them, and because there were a lot of vehicles, many of them went onto the edge of the salt marsh. Understandable, they were trying to park, they were trying to keep the road open so that other people could get past. They weren't doing this viciously or maliciously or intending to cause damage. Unfortunately, at the edge of the salt marsh is a very rare plant called sea wormwood. It only grows in 2 places in England. The sea wormwood is important because it's the food source, and the only food source, for the scarce pug moth. What those people were doing, totally unintentionally and without any intent, was to destroy a valuable piece of fauna which sustained the flora which sustained this pug moth. It was brought to the parish council's attention. The parish council didn't own any of that land. However, a group of volunteers got together, worked with the NWT warden, the harbour master volunteered. We approached a group of fundraisers in the village who put up money to buy wooden posts, and with volunteer labour, posts, with the agreement, I might add, of Norfolk Wildlife Trust, Natural England, all of the landowners. Have I missed anyone, Andrew? Norfolk County Council, Highways. Everybody was pulled in, everybody agreed that this was absolutely necessary, but it was a volunteer effort of people in the village responding to being made aware by Gary the warden that there was an issue. And now there are posts there so that people can still come down. Well, they will be able to come down, they can park, but they won't be damaging the environment, and maybe we can improve, maybe we can put a decent notice board there that explains why that's all happened, so they understand.
That's a really good story, and I think that's a brilliant example of how local communities and local stakeholders and actually nature organisations working to protect the site can come together and get a really positive outcome. And I think for Endure, that is something we're looking to promote.
It's not a matter of banning people or a matter of you can't do this and you can't do that, but a matter of us all learning how we can live better together. So an important part of the project is talking to local people and thinking about how we can live together with these dunes. We can protect them and they can protect us.
That's really nicely put, and a perfect way to end things. Professor George Revel, thank you so much for coming on, and good luck with this project, and I'm sure we'll speak to you again soon.
So, I hope you enjoyed the film. And what I would like you to do now is, I think you are sitting close enough to people to ask, but I'd like you to ask the person next to you the question that's on the screen, which is what elements are represented well and what elements are missing or not represented, and how does this matter? So if you could find somebody nearby to ask this question, some of you might have to move a little bit, and then we'll get your feedback from the group. And if you're online, please answer this question with the hashtag Endure Project. Okay. Do you have some examples of elements that were missing from or not represented well?
Or were represented well?
Or were represented well?
I think we can start with John. He was having some good ideas when I heard him earlier.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd seen the video before and thought it was really good. It was a job well done. elements are represented well. I thought definitely the local residents' representation, rather than just guys from organisations like us who, you know, yeah. So that's always good to see in these sort of activities. Ones that are missing. Feel like you're picking holes, but
no, feel free.
We only had 2 days, so there's 100 more people we could have, or things we could have represented.
So one thing I thought of was actually interviewing holidaymakers, visitors, and getting their reactions to being told about, you know, the whys and the wherefores, and so on. I appreciate one of the days it was raining, so there probably weren't many visitors about.
Yeah. They were kind of represented by being criticised by the locals to an extent, yeah.
Yeah, so that was just one suggestion I had anyway.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else volunteering? I'm going to go to our project partners because they've been way too quiet. Which one of you wants to have a go?
Hello. So
hello.
I'm Céline from the north of France. And I was wondering about the question about not represented. If you have some horses in the area using the dunes, because in the north of France, maybe more in the Bay of Somme river, we have a lot of horses activities. So
yeah.
There are horses on the coast, yeah, and we didn't talk to any horse riders. I've seen horse riders at Holcombe, and yeah, that's a good point.
At Holme-Next-The-Sea, there is a big stables, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they would have been great to talk to, and that's one of the things I think that you see how quickly you can expand what I would call the Sand Dune public.
Yeah, very true. Right, I'll pop it on here. Right, introduce yourself as well, please. There we go.
Hi, I'm Sasha from the RSPB Little Term Project. But I was going to say about dog walkers and staycationers as well, but potentially children, what they were kind of briefly mentioned, and you know, to what extent they could contribute is kind of questionable. But I think kind of moving forward, if we're looking at resilience in the long term, you want to know kind of how we're getting the kids interested and what their current feelings on restrictions are, perhaps would have been my
yeah, that's
suggestion.
A very good point, Sasha, and I think that's also happened with COVID, is that children haven't really been consulted and they've been left out of the debate a lot. So yeah, I mean that's right. And we were hoping to go into schools and do activities in schools, but again, because of COVID, we were unable to do that, or we haven't been able to do that yet.
Mm. And
Okay.
I think one of the things I wanted to say was, from the Latourian Parliament of Things theoretical perspective, one of the ideas is once you've seen how many are we, and you move to the question, how can we live together well, you've kind of got to start making some kind of hierarchy of, for example, well, what's important in the dunes for wildlife, if wildlife and biodiversity are more important than the dunes as sea defence, or maybe they could both be together. But I thought one of the key actors in the health of the dunes is the marram grass. And so you'd have that at the top of your hierarchy of protection if you wanted to protect the dunes. And so you can see how you might build a, you know, hierarchy of needs, if you like.
Okay, and the next question. We kind of came up with this structure which blended the theoretical and the practical to try and draw people in, make people interested in the dunes with what we called the wow factor, and sort of do that. So that structure. I thought could be a template or a model for other films or other activities. So that consists of these 5 elements: the wow factor, the questions from Bruno Latour: how many are we, and can we live together, or can we live together well? and then the additional kind of detail of exploring the actual context, and also thinking about the future, which I think is something that sometimes scientists don't talk about enough. They often describe, and I noticed this morning there was a lot of description about what the situations we're living in are, but not so much as ideas about where to next and what we should be doing in the future. And I think we're all kind of searching for those answers. So what I'd like you to do now is to, as before, to ask your partners or the people near you these two questions. How might you use the film itself, and how might you use the structure of the film in your work? So just a couple of minutes to ask the people next to you those questions, and then Alex will get some feedback from a couple of people.
And also what you might change,
well,
or do differently.
Maybe you wouldn't use it, and you'd use something different, and that's okay too. Okay, Alex, would you like to ask a couple of people?
Yes, absolutely. Apart from hearing myself less in that video, I'll go to Dan first.
Hello, I'm Dan from
Hi,
Uniotech. How I would use the film was I would provide it to local accommodation rental companies and let them give it to the holiday makers so they can know more information about the dunes before they even turn up.
Yeah, that's a really good idea.
Great idea, thank you.
Thank you. Who wants to go next?
I'm Siobhan Murphy from the Dynamic Dunescapes project, and we were just saying very similar that we need to get the message across to people who are visiting the area, and perhaps if there was a link from some of the websites like discovernorfolk.com or visitnorfolk.com, whatever it's called. And again, if you're trying to book a hotel in the area, that it could come up as a Google ad or a link. But I think probably the tone of it wants to be maybe more welcoming, not kind of, these people are coming causing problems. So,
yeah. Right, yeah.
And I think,
it's easy to fall into that trap of being overcritical. I think you're right.
And it was interesting how many local residents had an idea, probably not actually proven, that what visitors did was just come and walk through the dunes and didn't know anything about them. And they did need representation, the visitors, to counter that perception of them.
Yeah, that was really good. That was both how you would use a film and what you would change, so that's brilliant. I'll pass over to Martin here.
Oh yeah, I'm Martin Burchett from NCC. In terms of how we might use the film, I think we touched on it a bit earlier. Perhaps local schools or Norfolk-wide schools. I mean, I've always found that children are very good at absorbing these kind of things, and often they'll tell their parents or their family when they're out with them, mummy, daddy, you shouldn't be walking, you should have the dog on a lead, that kind of thing.
Yeah, they're sort of mini policemen, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And we were just talking about, in terms of the structure, I think it kind of covers the wow factor and the how many are we and living together well. We didn't really get a sense of the scale of the dunes. Right. And how close they actually are to the village.
Right.
There was a lot of talk about, my farm's down here or the village is here, but we didn't really get a sense of that thing.
So maybe we need a drone.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a good point. And I mean, what's interesting as well is, I mean, obviously we made the film under a sort of unusual conditions. But in the process of making the film and involving people, I found it really interesting how people would come out and talk to us, and then I think that would move people out of their entrenched views just by being listened to in the film and being placed in the film, and how that builds trust with all the different organisations. And the land management organisations are important, but equally are the visitors and the residents as important to the protection of the dunes. So making them feel important, I think, or accepting their importance, was part of making the film.
Okay, I have one final element. John?
Okay.
I'm popular today. Yes, so Mel and I discussed about how you might use the film, and it could be sent to influencers such as our political representatives or those type of people in those roles, to, you know, local MP. They can see the issues that are happening locally, but despite that being a locally focused point, it actually expands to a, you know, wider issues to do with the coast, the impacts on the countryside and so on. So, yeah, send it to political influencers.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
A few years ago, we did a project called Stories of Change, and that was very much the aim of that was to try and find stories of positive energy change from around the country and provide them kind of ready packaged to politicians so that they could say, look what's happening in our area, and try to give people positive examples of a way to go in terms of alternative energy. Yeah.
And also I like the way the film switches the scale. So we started off with the excellent talk, the first talk today, where we're looking at the global picture and the climate emergency, and that's an idea that we need heroes and ambulances and fire engines. It's an emergency. And then we go into this very tiny spot on the map, but you can see all the sort of mundane everyday things that you can do, and how in fact, you know, our responses are much more to do with that than this idea that there's a bigger picture. There's just so many locations. And I like the fact that it slows things down in that way. So, yeah. And the other thing I think to say is how important it's been for us, and I hope also for the Endure team, to collaborate and have different ideas and exchanges.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah. Right.
Thank you.